Hey everyone, welcome to the AI podcast. Today, my guest is Mutale Nkonde, and there aren't enough words to describe all of her accomplishments, so I'll try my best. Mutale is an expert in racial justice and tech, a UN advisor, and founder and CEO of the Emmy-winning communications firm AI for the People, which is a nonprofit that uses popular culture to educate Black audiences about the social justice implications of the deployment of AI technologies. She's also a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard Law School. Prior to that, she was an AI policy advisor and was part of the team that introduced the Algorithmic Accountability Act to the US House of Representatives in June 2019. She was also a non-resident fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab at Stanford. Mutale, thanks for joining our podcast. And if I didn't give all the descriptions in the introduction, you're welcome to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you for inviting. I'm always so embarrassed when people read that out because I'm always like, oh my God, wow, I would love to meet this person. They've done a lot. It's me. No, you did a great job.
Thank you so much. So, Mutale, my first question to you is, what is algorithmic bias?
Algorithmic bias is a phenomenon by which machine learning, which is the basic engineering process that enables us to create advanced technologies like AI, ends up being trained in such a way that it expresses the same biases, whether that's racism or sexism or casteism or any of the isms, homophobia, as we find in wider society. And a really good example of that here in the US was during COVID. There was an algorithm that our hospital systems were using in some states to decide who got beds, right? Everybody's ill, it's a pandemic, people are in hospital, they're dying. We don't want humans to do it because humans have bias. Let's get the algorithm to do it. And what ended up happening were millions of Black people were discriminated against in the hospital setting because the algorithm was engineered to assign beds to people who cost less to the health system. The idea being, we're spending all of this money on health expenditure, let's get cheaper patients.
Yep.
And those patients tended to be white patients, richer patients, because they already had access to healthcare.
Yep.
So when they showed up, they weren't as sick. And that's an example of how an algorithm has made a racist assumption in that case.
Wow, that's interesting in so many different ways. And my next question would be, how do you think we can circumvent adding this kind of biases to an algorithm and to balance out the biases that we add to these algorithms, because most of the time they're invisible, and it is possible that these biases are being added to the algorithm unintentionally. So my question to you would be, how can we circumvent that from happening?
I would agree. I would say that the way biases become engineered into systems isn't because engineers are terrible people that want to discriminate. It's because part of engineering, for folks who are engineers know this, but people listening who aren't, you have to make decisions. Are you going to use this input or that input? Is this input, is it easier to get the data? Is there more publicly available data? Or are we going to have to spend resources to get these other data sets? And it's been a really interesting journey. Google here in the US was under huge fire because they were trying to take the biases out of a facial recognition algorithm.
Yeah.
And the way that they did that was by going into communities where there were lots of people with dark skin who were homeless, and then offering them $5 to take a picture of their face. That's a lot of other problems because people do not have consent. They're already vulnerable, that you're capturing their data. So the point I'm making is that when we're trying to de-bias algorithms, we can actually create more problems that are based. So I always advocate, and the reason AI for the People is such a huge supporter of policy intervention, is that we need to develop minimum standards by which our technologies should be functional and not release them unless they are functional. We do a lot of work with the UN where we think about human rights impact assessment as being a vehicle by which algorithms can be less biased. So not going to the engineering, but saying here in the quality assurance process, let's actually test how this works. And if it has an impact on already traditionally marginalized groups more than other groups, then let's either not release the algorithm, yet let's use the technology differently, or let's repurpose the technology because the legal implications are too great at that point.
On that point, I have another question because, as you can imagine, any innovation in AI is becoming more and more difficult, and it's such a competitive field. And of course, every company wants an competitive advantage, which means time is a really big constraint here. And what you're saying is that to assess the impact on different groups, you need to assign some, man hours and then some amount of monetary incentive there to sort of make it for the impact assessment. So how do you think the process would be beneficial for the company as well, and also for the community or group of people who the AI is supposed to serve?
I think it has to come through tax incentives. So a great way to make a company be good is to offer that company money. So if you either mandate through law, which is one approach, we already have in most countries, you can't just release medicine into the marketplace. There is some type of government regulation and certification that medicine needs to go through. So developing something similarly for the algorithmic actors. But we also have to really appreciate that we're in an arms race too. So it's not just that we're in a technology race. We are actually in a race to think about who is going to be the most powerful nation. And it's traditionally been the United States and China. India is now coming into that mix. They have more young people. They have more educated people. If you look at the US tech sector, Indian CEOs are leading our largest companies.
Absolutely.
People of 80%. And so between these three powers, we need to make sure that we can incentivize people across the globe to do this. Because if America starts to develop these really good, slow algorithms, but China and India are developing much faster and get ahead, that's not going to be good for foreign policy, and the other way around. And so what we always say is that across the board, those companies, with the exception of China, which is a communist state, but it's like a capitalist communist state, different podcast, I can talk about it later. But, with India, which is a democracy, we can go hopefully, and this is again, the UN, using vehicles like the UN and saying, look, you're going to have to give these people tax breaks. And use that as an incentive to shape this behavior.
That is really interesting. Yeah, and I love that idea. So on the point of foreign policy, do you think it would be beneficial if there was a global policy or an act to use AI for any product? Do you think that is beneficial to sort of regulate the whole innovation of AI throughout the globe?
We would never do it globally because each country has sovereignty, and I'm Zambian, so I am from a former British colony, and the idea of just going back into a colonial system, I mean, I'm mad about the king's coronation. Let's put it there. So, the idea of
100%
that those same systems isn't going to work. But I do think that it's important to have these conversations across the globe and come to an understanding. We decided in 1945 that we would no longer have atomic bombs because we felt that those were such a threat to humanity after what happened in Japan. There is a way for us to have this conversation because AI for the People, the organization I run, is looking for a future where people and machines work together to move us
100%.
forward. It shouldn't be, in my view, that we have an innovation and then we just say we're not going to use the innovation because it's too dangerous. There is a midway point where we can think about what are the human rights impacts, what are the civil rights impacts, how is this going to drive economies in the post-COVID environment. We've lost economic gain. We need to make that back up.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And shifting gears a little bit here, can you speak a little bit about the AI Advocacy Act?
Yes, so the AI Accountability Act was really looking at this idea. How can we develop policy frameworks in which AI systems are privacy protecting? They're never going to be free of bias because it's people creating the machines. But how do we regulate that? And then how do we as well not discourage people from innovation? Because I think one of the things that is exciting about the tech industry and what we do is that you can have an idea on Thursday, you can write the code on Friday, you can release it on Saturday and see what it does. In theory, I know it doesn't really work that way, but it's this idea of getting things to market very quickly. And one of the things that we did was go back to this idea of impact assessments. We're never going to be able to regulate people's ideas, nor do we want to. We don't want to necessarily regulate slow things coming to the market to such an extent that people can't release because of the geopolitical conversation that we've had, but we do want to make sure that these are safe. And what's really exciting about that for me is that it was first entered in 2019, just as an idea. We called it a messaging act. We didn't expect it to go anywhere. It picked up co-sponsors, was re-entered again in 2022, which was really exciting. I got to go to Congress. I got to testify to support this act that I'd been championing for all of these years. I was very happy. Amazing. And then we're looking at other legislation around AI. And one of the things that we found is that people are going back to that act and taking key pieces from the act and putting it into other pieces of legislation. So even if that never got passed, the spirit of the act and the norms would be in all of these other places. And I don't think that it was an accident that it was driven by myself. I'm a Black woman. The key sponsors were Black women in the House of Representatives. And this is because of the huge amount of online harassment that women were facing back in that time and still are today. And it was specifically for Black women. So you had this population who were like, these algorithms are ruining my life. What can we do to solve that?
Wow. On that point, AI Accountability Act, and we talked about regulating. Of course, we don't want to regulate the ideas or innovation, but we do want to regulate how we use AI when we deploy an AI model into the society, how it's impacting and what is the effect of it on humanity in broader sense. And we talked about how a tax exemption for these new companies would be really beneficial. And my question to you is, because recently Sam Altman came up with similar idea on in the Congress as well, where he's asking the Congress to regulate AI, even though he himself is running OpenAI, which moved from a research company to a profitability company. And my question to you is, what do you think about that? Like, is it fair? Because big companies, are they sticking by their rules, or is it just for small players?
I think it's great that you have Sam Altman, you have Elon Musk, you have Peter Thiel, you have these people who had these companies that are really pushing this field forward, that they're making this request.
Yeah.
The issue is they also want to write the legislation, and they would write the legislation in such a way that they wouldn't really be regulated. It would be
100%.
like the tiniest thing. However, it does give momentum to that argument, which is, as somebody who's a big picture thinker and a strategist, I don't care where the support comes from. I just want the support. I think for smaller companies, there has to be some stair stepping, because there's no way that a startup can meet the same level of scrutiny that one of the bigger FANG companies can. However, the way that the market operates is that small companies are often acquired by larger companies for their capabilities. So that startup economy is somewhat transient, because people are looking for the exit within 10 years, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way that we would get regulation. I think for the smaller companies, whether it's revenue base, whether it's scale, whether there has to be some cutoff to say, if your algorithm is, I'm making this up, if your algorithm is used by more than 5 million people, you have to do this, and this. If it's used less than 5 million, you have to do this, and this. That way, you're training these people to think about this, because engineers are not trained to think about social impact. People like me are trained to think about social impact, right? I'm a social scientist. So that way you get to integrate this social science thinking into technical processes.
Yeah, that is a really good answer, and I love your ideas. And at some point we can also talk about how all of this can go into autonomous driving, because that is a whole different point that we can talk about. There's so many things to talk about in autonomous driving, and I think about it all the time. So many social scientists need to be involved in the whole project, and at this point we are not doing enough. So that is for some other day. I'll shift gears a little bit. Have you used ChatGPT?
I have used ChatGPT.
GPT. Yeah.
GPT. I always get it wrong. I have used it. I have not tried. I have intentionally not used it very much, because I don't want to train the model.
That is true. Now with the GPT-4, you have the option to opting out of training, but who knows? Who knows? So my question is, what kind of bias have you encountered? Because I know you research different AI models. Have you encountered any biases in ChatGPT?
I have. I recently wrote a story about how I'd asked ChatGPT a question about the influence of Black women. So this isn't a biographical question where you can type in my name and then a bunch of stuff comes up, right?
Yeah.
This is asking about influence. And what was so interesting was that ChatGPT couldn't tell me about the influence of this woman, but they could give me a biography. And that let me know that in the training of the model, there just wasn't enough base data around Black women in power.
Yeah.
And that becomes a problem when we look at the Bing integration or the Bard integration of that same generative technology, because when we think about search, we also just assume that search engines have the answers to everything. And the truth of it is, search engines are AI models, and they have the same biases as every other AI model. And if we build ChatGPT to not recognize that non-white people have contributed to human thought and human endeavor, ChatGPT also is not a fact checker. So it's not so much of a bias, but if we think about the spread of false information on the internet and what that does, you also have problems in the base data. I'm doing a paper right now that's looking at white supremacist speech online. And I was shocked in my research to find out that the white supremacy movement in the United States were the earliest adopters of the internet. So when you were
Unbelievable.
right, they were the
Unbelievable.
earliest adopters. So when you're training a model on white people, you're picking up a lot of their content. And so your model is going to pick up a lot of those ideologies, just because from a statistics point of view, if there are 100 articles on Hitler,
Yeah.
one article on Gandhi, what the model is a Hitler model, right?
100%.
So those are the biases that we'll see. Now, what I do like about what Altman's team are doing is that they're aware of this, and they do warn people that this is a model and it's not God, and it's not the Holy Grail. But I think as a society, we don't think like that. I think you, me, people listening to this podcast, we are all AI enthusiasts. We know that these are tools and they're not definitive answers. In the field, that's not how people see them. I've, this is anecdotally. I don't have the data, a big data set, but even in casual conversations with friends, I've heard them say, I asked ChatGPT X, and it said Y. And they're acting as if ChatGPT is accurate, and it's just not.
Yeah, I try to remind people of that all the time. People think these are the word from God, whatever ChatGPT spits out, and it's good to know that you are interacting with a machine, and it does not have any human emotion or human thought process, none of that. So it's
value
just
system.
Yeah, it's just a statistical model that spits out word. That's it. And it doesn't have to be correct all the time. It's just for fun and games at this point. We are still building the whole thing. And as a researcher, and you brought up some good points, and my next question is kind of in the same line. As a researcher, how the new wave of AI at the present time, how I see it is generative AI, right? Generative art, generative models like ChatGPT, whatever model we are coming up with is generating something. And it's not just language models, it's also image generators as well. And I'm talking about stable diffusion. And I was recently reading about the biases and in stable diffusion and stable diffusion based tools, for example, Lensa AI, and they came up with a lot of they recently encountered a lot of backlash for generating images for women that are not very good for the equality that we are trying to achieve in the society. And it also is generating a lot of pornographic images. And my question to you is, why do we, as human society, whenever we encounter a new technology which we are supposed to use for something good, why do we always use it for pornographic content and gambling? Why do we do that?
I think it goes back to my prior response about who adopts. So the people that are the earliest adopters of advanced technological projects in the United States tend to be young white men who are out at the margins of society. And the reason that I pick out that group isn't because they're a bad group, but if you think about what the promise of America is, the promise of America is a nation in which white men should be able to fly above all others. It's the history that we have. These are the images that we have. We invest. Just think about the startup economy. VCs spend 93% of their assets on startups started by young white men. So imagine what that must be psychologically to live in a society and you look up and you see Michael Jordan, or you look up and you see LeBron James, or you look up and you see Beyonce. And those are people that are that have achieved so much despite not being from that group. The internet has always been, and technology has always been, a place that those aggrieved people go to work things out. One. The second thing is we use, and I'm speaking specifically of communications technologies, images, text. We use those systems to work out our emotional problems. Anybody that has been on Facebook for 1 minute knows that those Facebook feeds are a stream of consciousness talking about people's emotional state. So 100%. If you have people who are already upset with society, then going and developing these technologies and training these models, then you end up with internets that reflect their frustrations. There is a societal hatred of women, all women, and one of the easiest ways to debase a woman is through the creation of non-consensual pornographic material, which is why deep fakes were released. I don't know, remember 2000, what was the first thing that they were used for? Pornographic content. Absolutely. If we think about the way Osama bin Laden was captured by US forces, it was because a credit card was used to access pornographic material from his hideout. We don't know whether it was Osama. We don't know, but we know somebody in the cave in the middle of nowhere needed to see porn. That is crazy to me. You are living in a cave in the middle of nowhere, but that is something that you're accessing. And then I think the other thing is when you think about the politics of discontent on the information superhighway, that's also what we click onto. That's what other people pay attention. Lindsay, I'm going to say her name, Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, the woman who'd worked there, then leaked 10,000 documents onto the press. One of the big disclosures that came out of that was that Facebook were optimizing for posts that made people angry because they increased the advertising value of the platform. So all of these toxic elements are why our internet at its base has those elements. And by the way, I did say white men, but it's whoever the dominant group is in society. Let me say that. I don't want to pick out one group.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense to me why, Facebook would do that, even though it is possible at some point it was probably an unwilling bias to add those kind of aggravating content into their feed, but we're not sure. But it makes sense to me that they want to, poke the emotions of people because that will sell. That will sell their product.
And to be fair to Facebook on that point, Facebook's only obligation is to their shareholders and to 100%. Increase shareholder value. Facebook should not be, in my view, expected to take care of the soul of the nation. That is not their mission. And they did it in ways that are harmful. And that's why you need people like me and other professionals within this field so that we can find balance. Facebook, we want you to make profit. We are in a capitalist system, but we 100%. Also don't want you to have content that destabilizes society as a whole. I think that's reasonable.
That makes sense. I read an article that you wrote in 2019. I know it's been a long time. It says, is AI bias a corporate social responsibility issue? And I love the article because I have always thought that it should be. But can you expand a little bit more on the idea that how AI bias can be a corporate social responsibility? Because before this, we always thought corporate social responsibility is the impact assessment of their company. If you are manufacturing a product, are you impacting a group of people? If you are, what are you doing to circumvent that? So if you can talk about it a little bit.
I'm actually really passionate about that idea, just because businesses, like you said, are already doing these impact assessments. But if algorithmic systems become part of your proprietary data, proprietary holdings of the business, and we know, for example, probably the most valuable algorithm that we have in the world is the Google algorithm. We still really have no idea how they convert the text into a search, right? If that's your business, and if that's the key component of your business, then that impact of that algorithm has to come into your CSR. That's the thing you've manufactured, has to come into your CSR evaluations. But
Right.
as we become an AI-driven society, because I don't think we've talked about that yet, but we need to really point out, people like you and I are not niche. Every system, every part of human endeavor is going to be impacted by AI systems.
Yep.
Every part,
Yep.
globally. And so if we're going to integrate this into our economy, to the point that it's going to become as omnipresent as oxygen,
Yep.
or as electricity, then bias, then the societal impact, which includes bias, it includes environmental impact. How did you get those minerals, right? It includes all of those things, need to be part of the CSR plan, and that can actually be that can add competitive advantage to your company. We work really closely with Google, and we were really proud that for one of their Android phone releases here in the US, they decided to make sure that the camera would recognize people with all skin tones. That was going to be the selling point.
Yep.
That was a really, really, really smart and good way to get into bias in digital image production. And Google led on that. It is their fastest selling Android phone. And the people that bought it the most were white men. You know why? It's a better phone. It's the best Android on the market. And so trying to encourage companies to see how these approaches can also drive sales is part of that work too.
And while we're talking about corporate social responsibility, another big issue while working with AI is job replacement and automation. And another thing I always think about, do you think it's a company's responsibility to, if a company is working with AI and innovating AI, is it their responsibility to protect jobs? And if so, how can we do that?
I think it's the government's responsibility. I do not trust any individual company to come up with a social plan, because their job has to be to increase shareholder value. I do think, to the wider point that you're making, that governments across the globe should be thinking about, what are we going to do with these displaced people? I've just described how the politics of discontent has led to social being extremely toxic. Imagine the toxicity that we see in social in every single part of the society. And it's, at first, people just thought it's going to be people that work in Amazon factories. We don't care about them. They don't have much education. They don't. Whereas now, here in the US, we have a writer's strike. And then today, just before we came online, we're going to have an actor's strike. You know why? Because AI is being used to generate scripts using generative AI, and AI is also being used to create characters so that they don't need to have actors. And when Tom Cruise strikes, when I want to say Will Smith, but he's now slapped somebody, so it's a different. But when you think about when these, really big, rich, successful people start striking because their jobs, you're going to realize that doctors are under threat for this. Surgeons, do we really, really need a surgeon if we can create an algorithm that can drive a mechanical arm to do the surgery? Lawyers, actors, like when it's these white collar jobs, people are going to have an issue. And we need to be able to retrain our workforce for more jobs like the job I have, which is helping people explain how to use the technologies, look at the impact of the technologies, think about potentially alternative use cases for capitalization. People like me will work. People like you will work, because people are going to want to know, what is the latest system? How do I use it? Where do I get it? But if your job isn't somehow aligned with this changeover in the economy, what are we going to do with those people? And I think governments need to think really, really hard about not just displacement, but what are the new jobs going to be created from the displacement, and how do we train towards that and educate towards that?
Interesting. I always thought about the idea as three different spectrum. So on one spectrum, you have the workforce, and it can be white collar job or blue collar. It can be anything, and they are completely against AI. Then on the other side, you have people who are AI extremists, who think, why wouldn't I replace this job with AI because AI is doing a better job than you? Then there's the middle spectrum, where I stand, where I believe that we don't need to fight. We can use AI as a tool to improve our productivity. What do you think about that idea? The using AI as a tool to improve productivity, so that we can live in a society where we can use AI, and we can keep the jobs. Of course, some of the jobs will be replaced, and we have to think about how to displace those jobs with others. But for especially for the white collar jobs, for example, an AI can do a really good job of impersonating Tom Cruise, but of course, it can be 100% correct, at least not at this point. We are far from it. So what do you think about the idea, even if it's really advanced, what do you think about the idea where AI can be used as a tool to improve productivity? Is that a good idea?
I think that's optimal. I think that that's exactly that's the future that we should be building towards, but we also then need to educate towards that future. We need to, and we need those use cases, because the way that we're using AI technologies at this stage is in very harmful ways. We're using a lot of recognition. Policing is one of the, security forces are one of the institutions that's adopting really quickly, whether it's facial recognition, machine gun, like all of these inaccurate technologies for these high stakes decisions. But what happens when we're using it in teaching environments, right? We don't want AI teachers necessarily, but we can think of ways in the education process that maybe AI can help teachers sort or categorize information so that they can actually work on delivery. I think that that's a really cool use case. Or in the medical field, we can definitely, maybe not who gets a bed in a pandemic because people are dying, but they can be used maybe for charts. I don't know, I'm just making things up. But we also, I think, have to make people very comfortable. In my social circle, I have a friend who, and I didn't realize this honestly till last week, didn't go to college. All of my friends are college educated, and she said that she is terrified of AI because she believes it's going to take the jobs that she's always done. And I need to really look at her and say, I mean, in McDonald's or the fast food restaurants, we don't actually need people in them. We need maybe machines. 2 or 3 people. But it's actually more efficient just to go to the machine and then get your thing. And so there's going to be displacement there, but there has to be human beings somewhere in that environment, because machines make mistakes. Models, especially when you get into deep learning, because I think we're speaking about machine learning that's very linear, like very elementary models. But what ends up happening as these models mature, and we haven't even seen that yet because they haven't been deployed long enough, is that they're going to have so much experiential training data that they're going to start doing things that we didn't anticipate. And that's when you need the human beings to come in and say, and it happened with ChatGPT. I think, going back to the Hitler thing, ChatGPT started to say Nazi things. And people were like, oh, OpenAI, they're Nazis. And it's like, no, those were the first people to adopt the internet. And so that corpus is
Yeah.
gonna be in that base.
Yeah, and we have this idea because I published my research when in grad school on how to use AI for manufacturing, and we had this idea of Industry 5.0 because they're calling it the fifth revolution of industry.
Mhm.
The fourth revolution of industry was data-driven manufacturing, where you collect tons of data and everything is automated. And this new idea sort of came out of Europe, no surprise there. Uh, the Industry 5.0, where humans and AI can work together to improve the workforce. And I really love that idea because that's how we should try to build the system of AI so that it can help us improve ourselves. My
I
final, yeah, sorry.
And I'm finishing grad school next year, and it
Okay.
feels like it will never come. So whenever I hear someone say, when I was in grad school, just know that you've given me hope for my own
Oh,
future.
100%.
That
You will,
one day I will be able
yeah.
to say, when I was in grad school, it will be a good day.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll crush it. Uh, if my final question is, you founded AI for the people. Uh, what is AI for the people? What are you doing to for this AI impact assessment for AI, racial justice, and everything? If you can describe.
Yes. So AI for the people has gone through a number of iterations, as I think all tech focused startups do.
Yes.
But we're 4 years and we've landed on really being a policy shop in many ways. So we're really interested in building support for impact assessment to reduce bias.
Yes.
Primarily racial bias is where we started, but it's a research-based company, and over the years we found other, seats of bias. So for example, we've just submitted a paper to the UN where we were talking about English language dominance and natural language processing, and what that means in terms of content moderation protocols for social media companies across the globe, because many of the models that we look at are global models. They may be made in California, but they're deployed all over the world, and that has its impacts. And so we say that our mission is to increase support for this type of work. We do that using culture. So we're really interested. We do a lot of work with journalists. We do a lot of work. We did before the writer strike with filmmakers and TV makers, but now
Yeah.
everybody's on strike, so that's not happening. And our goal is to really increase the public conversation. And we've been so happy that Jeffrey Hinton and other from Google, who recently came out and said that he had to leave the
Yeah.
company so he could talk about the dangers of AI,
Yeah.
have come out and said that, because that really helps with the education element of our work.
Yeah.
We work in 3 distinct ways: US tech policy, and we've spoken about the Algorithmic Accountability Act, human rights norms. So we're working really hard with digital rights organizations across the globe to put pressure on the Human Rights Council to
Yeah.
name freedom from algorithmic bias as a human right. So we're doing that work at the moment. And then workforce development, which is not something that we set out to do, but
Yeah.
we realized that it's really, really difficult for non-white people, specifically those who are gendered as women, or from other groups, to succeed within these tech companies. They're very hostile environments.
Yeah.
So we offer an alternative space for people to work outside of industry. And I didn't set out to do that work, but I think it's probably it's exciting to watch launch the career of somebody who's going to end up working at Meta or at Amazon or in government, but they have that basic training in human rights focused, civil rights focused tech development.
That is brilliant. And that's all the questions I have. Do you want to part us, our audience, with some final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts would be that we need all of you. There are not enough people in this field, and we need people who can build those models, bias and all, but we just need the models out. We need people that understand those models and can interpret those models. We need people that can help us govern those models. And then we need people that can help really skill up and increase public understanding of when and how to use these systems. We never want to become a society that relies on technology. I really love what you talked about in terms of your thesis, that we should be a tech AI enabled society, and we need help with people to get us across that. And then the last thing I would say, and this is completely out of scope for us on this podcast, but we also need to make sure that immigration and migration is those borders are opened, because in the tech industry, I've worked here for 15 years, there are so many foreign-born, foreign-trained people working in AI in the United States.
Yes.
And we need to make sure that those borders stay open so that we can come and do that work and transfer knowledge.
I love that idea. Okay. Thank you, Mutale, for joining the podcast. I am deeply honored to talk to you. That was such a good conversation. I loved every second of it. And
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And with that, I will end today's podcast.
Bye, everybody.